By the time I stepped onto the polished concrete floor at Lattice Harbor Retail's new distribution hub, I already had that crawling feeling between my shoulder blades that usually meant someone was about to lie to my face with a smile. I was 26, head of safety for a retailer big enough to sell patio chairs, vitamins, pet food, and shame in bulk. My job looked glamorous only to people who had never read an injury claim, a workers' compensation file, or a deposition where a manager says, with astonishing confidence, that common sense was the training plan. The facility manager, Owen, greeted me like I was a surprise tax bill. He had perfect teeth, polished loafers, and the kind of handshake men use when they want to remind you that they think you are decorative. Beside him stood Vic, the operations lead, broad-shouldered and smug, and a team lead named Rena, who watched everything with nervous eyes and said nothing. I had barely crossed the receiving lane when a forklift whipped around a pallet stack in a lazy spinning circle. Actual donuts. For a moment I thought my brain had added theater to the scene out of self-defense. Then the driver laughed. Another worker standing on the forks with both arms out like he was on a parade float. They rolled toward a rack, raised him into the air, and he leaned over to tug down cartons from a higher shelf. No fall protection, no approved platform, no spotter, no ladder, no plan except apparently surviving on charm. I stopped so abruptly Owen nearly walked into my back. "What?" I asked very calmly. "Am I looking at?" Owen exhaled through his nose. "They are just moving fast." "Fast toward a lawsuit," I said. The worker on the forks wobbled. The driver overcorrected. My heart lurched hard enough to bruise. They steadied. Then the two of them grinned like boys who had gotten away with stealing fireworks. I asked for maintenance logs, pre-shift inspection sheets, training records, disciplinary protocols, equipment service schedules. Owen said someone would pull them. That sentence, in corporate dialect, often means those documents either do not exist or have been living a creative life. I walked the rest of the floor and found more gifts. A forklift with a cracked mirror, another with bald tires. Reverse alarms silent as dead fish. Shrink wrap pooled like slick ice near the loading area. A charging station blocked by cardboard bales. One emergency exit with a pallet parked in front of it, as if fire politely waited for clearance. I called the meeting within the hour. The lower managers and team leads crowded into a stale conference room with plastic chairs and the smell of burnt coffee. Owen sat at the head like a man forced to attend his own scolding. Vic leaned back and crossed his arms. Two supervisors, Leon and Brad, shared the expression of men who believed rules were a hobby for weaker people. I laid out what I had seen: forklift misuse, fall exposure, lack of servicing, failure to inspect, training failures, housekeeping hazards, emergency egress blockage. I explained the plain truth. If someone died, the company would not only bleed money, it could face regulatory penalties, civil liability, and personal accountability for managers who ignored known dangers. Leon smirked. "You make it sound dramatic." I smiled at him. "Near death usually lacks subtlety." Brad laughed. Vic joined him. Owen rubbed his temple like I was the inconvenience, not the danger. I started outlining required corrective actions and legal exposure. Mid-sentence, Brad stood up. "This is warehouse work," he said, "not ballet." Then he walked out. Leon followed. One more team lead drifted out after them, chuckling. Even Vic glanced at his phone and rose as if my meeting were optional entertainment. I watched them go and wrote every name down. People love mocking safety until blood appears on the floor. Then they want records, witnesses, policies, signatures, and a woman they dismiss to tell them how bad it is. I closed my notebook, looked at the ones who stayed, and said, "Good. Now I know exactly where the problem sits." Rena met my eyes then, and for a second, she almost smiled. She knew what I knew. Arrogance is loud right up until impact. I did not need people to like me. I needed them to fear a bad decision before it turned into a funeral with catered sandwiches. After that meeting, I stayed on site and moved through the facility like a storm with a clipboard. I photographed hazards, tagged equipment, and pulled every maintenance file the office could scrape together. The stack was thin, which told me more than a thick one could. Thin files in a busy warehouse mean one of two things: neglect or fiction. Sometimes both, dating each other in secret. Rena found me near the battery charging area, where one forklift sat plugged in with a frayed cable wrapped in tape. "You were right," she said softly. "That is not the kind of sentence people usually whisper." She glanced over her shoulder. "They do not service half the fleet unless something fully breaks. Vic says downtime hurts performance numbers. Downtime also hurts less than a crushed pelvis." That almost got a laugh out of her. She told me drivers skipped checklists, supervisors signed off after the fact, temporary workers copied old inspection forms without looking at the machines. A vendor contract for maintenance existed, but visits had been delayed because someone in operations wanted to save money at quarter close. Of course they did. Somewhere, an amateur tyrant had shaved a budget line and called it leadership. I asked who approved the delay. She hesitated. "Owen," she said, but Vic pushed for it. There it was. Not just sloppiness. A paper trail with ambition. I documented everything. I sent a formal interim hazard notice to regional leadership, legal, risk management, and human resources. I kept the language clean, factual, and impossible to wiggle out of later. Known unsafe conduct, repeated warnings, inadequate maintenance controls, immediate corrective action required. When men like Owen read words that tidy, they feel the noose before they see the rope. By early afternoon, Vic cornered me beside receiving. "You escalated fast. I walk fast too. Any other simple observations?" His jaw tightened. "You are making this place look reckless." I tilted my head. "I did not make your staff ride forklifts like carnival props." He leaned in, voice low. "You come in here for one visit and think you understand operations." I met his stare. "I understand negligence in every accent." He stepped back at that, not because he respected me, but because bullies hate finding a harder surface than their own ego. I ordered several forklifts pulled from service immediately, including the silent one with the dead reverse alarm and another with steering lag. Owen protested that it would slow throughput. I told him injury investigations were slower. He did not enjoy me. Before I left for the evening, I held a smaller session with the workers who remained. No scolding, no grandstanding. I showed them how shortcuts become evidence, how a missed inspection can void internal defenses, how a company insurer studies patterns, how individual supervisors can get dragged into witness interviews when they ignore written hazards. I explained that safety was not about being delicate. It was about going home with your spine, your paycheck, and your legal footing intact. They listened. Not all of them believed me yet, but they listened. Brad and Leon were nowhere in sight. According to Rena, they were out on the floor joking that I would probably make the forklifts wear seatbelts next. Fine. I had learned something valuable in corporate life. If a fool refuses a warning, give him documentation and space. The lesson usually arrives wearing steel toes. I headed for the parking lot with my notes, my photos, and a rising suspicion that this site was hanging together with bravado and zip ties. The sunset stained the truck bays red. Behind me, a forklift moved through the aisle in eerie silence, backing without a peep from its alarm. I turned and watched it disappear. That soundless reverse was going to cost someone dearly. I just did not know how soon. The call came sometime in the early morning, in before coffee and before my patients had properly arrived. Severe incident at the Lattice Harbor facility. No one in my line of work enjoys being right. People imagine vindication feels warm. It does not. It feels cold and metallic, like a handrail in winter. I was in the car within minutes, driving through gray light while legal called, then risk management, then a regional vice president who had ignored my message until the word severe incident appeared in an email subject line. Funny how urgency improves reading skills. When I reached the warehouse, the loading area was ringed with yellow barriers and pale faces. A worker sat on the floor against a support column, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Another was crying near the break room door. I spotted Owen immediately. His loafers were gone, replaced by borrowed safety shoes, which told me he wanted to look useful after the fact. "What happened?" I asked. No greeting, no cushioning. He swallowed. Brad was struck by a reversing forklift in aisle 12. The room went so still in my head I could hear every lie he had ever told. Condition? Serious. Very serious. He was conscious when they took him. I walked the aisle with security, Rena, and the shift investigator. The marks on the floor told the story faster than the managers did. Brad had stepped into the travel lane while arguing with a picker. The driver reversed without turning fully to look. The reverse alarm never sounded. The brakes bit late. The forklift clipped Brad hard enough to throw him sideways into the rack upright. Boxes came down around him. Had the angle been worse, that rack could have folded him into the concrete. Near fatal, the paramedic later said. Near fatal. My favorite corporate phrase. It means tragedy stopped just short of making the paperwork impossible to spin. The driver, a young man named Milo, was shaking so badly he could barely hold the water bottle someone had given him. He admitted he had noticed the reverse alarm was dead days earlier. He thought maintenance knew. He admitted he was rushing. He admitted he did not look properly. That is the ugly thing about preventable accidents. They are rarely one bad act. They are a chain of small permissions. Skip the service, skip the inspection, skip the training, skip the warning. Laugh at the person waving the red flag, then act stunned when the fire arrives. I asked for the forklift records. Again. This time, nobody told me someone would pull them. Papers appeared like magic from every cabinet on Earth. The service logs confirmed missed maintenance intervals. The inspection forms were identical copies across multiple days, same handwriting, same boxes checked, same false devotion to reality. A maintenance request for the reverse alarm had been opened and closed without repair. Closed. Without repair. I stared at that entry for a long moment. Who closed this? Rena answered quietly. Vic approved it pending the next vendor visit. I nodded once. Of course he did. Then came the meeting everyone suddenly had time to attend. No one laughed when I walked in. No one checked a phone. Leon looked sick. Owen looked older. Vic tried to look steady, which is different from being steady and less convincing up close. I stood at the front, placed the unsound forklift report on the table, and let silence do its work. Then I began. You treated safety like an annoying woman in sensible shoes, I said. Now one of your own nearly died because you confused delay with savings, swagger with competence, and paperwork with reality. Nobody moved. I laid out the failures one by one, ignored warnings, dead alarm, unserviced fleet, false inspections, manager knowledge, exposure to regulatory action, civil liability, employment consequences, insurance repercussions, potential vendor breach claims, no raised voice, no drama, just the clean, surgical pleasure of truth used properly. Vic opened his mouth to interrupt. I lifted one finger. No, you had your meeting. You walked out of mine. That landed harder than shouting ever could. And for the first time since I arrived at that warehouse, every eye in the room was exactly where I wanted it, on me. People call it revenge when a woman uses receipts. Men call it process when they do the same thing in a Navy suit. I spent the rest of that day turning their culture into evidence, not fabricated evidence. Better. Their own. Every email, every deferred service request, every budget note, every inspection sheet signed by hands that never touched the machines, Every message where operations praised speed and said nothing about maintenance. I built the timeline like a staircase and invited the right executives to climb it. By sometime in the afternoon, regional leadership arrived in a blur of hard hats and urgent expressions. So did counsel for the company. Suddenly, the same managers who treated me like background noise were calling me strategic. I accepted the compliment the way one accepts a wilted salad. It existed. That was about all I could say for it. I led the executive walk through the floor. I showed them the forklift with the dead reverse alarm, the inspection records that somehow claimed it was fine, the maintenance work order closed without repair, the blocked exit, the unauthorized lifting practice several workers had described, the cost pressure emails, the absence of documented corrective action after my prior meeting. Then I translated it into the language executives never ignore. This is not just a safety failure, I said. It is a governance failure. Known operational risk was dismissed, internal controls were circumvented, record integrity is compromised, and supervisory judgment cannot be relied upon. If opposing counsel ever sees this, they will not need creativity. They will need folders. The regional vice president, a sharp woman named Selah, did not even blink. Who is responsible? I gave her names, dates, documents, and the exact decisions attached to each. Owen tried a soft little pivot about staffing pressures and throughput commitments. Sella cut him off with one look. It was exquisite. Vic attempted the old trick of collective blame. The site has been under strain. I answered before anyone else could. Strain is not a defense to negligence. It is usually the setting. Sella almost smiled at that. By the next internal review session, the room had transformed from swagger club to funeral parlor. Brad was still in the hospital, expected to recover but facing a long rehabilitation. Milo had been pulled from driving pending retraining and investigation. Leon looked as if laughter had become medically inaccessible. I did not insult them. I did not need to. I simply required each supervisor to state, in plain language, one decision they had ignored and one control they had failed to enforce. They had to say it out loud, in front of peers, executives, and legal. It was not cruelty. It was memory engineering. Rena spoke too, calmly, clearly. She described raising concerns and being brushed aside. I watched several heads turn toward Vic like flowers tracking poison. Then I rolled out the corrective plan. Immediate fleet servicing, lockout for any failed alarm, steering issue, brake defect, or tire hazard. Mandatory live inspections at shift start with random audits, certified access equipment for elevated retrieval, retraining for all lift drivers and supervisors, written accountability matrix, incident escalation rules, preservation of records, no retaliation for reporting hazards. I attached each item to operational risk, financial exposure, and legal consequences because adults learn faster when the lesson includes money. When I finished, nobody moved. Then Sella spoke. Mina will oversee site compliance directly until further notice. That was my name, and that was my promotion without the title change. Vic stared at the table. Owen had the distant look of a man mentally updating his resume. Leon looked at me with a mix of fear and reluctant respect. Good. Fear is not the goal, but it is a useful escort on the road to discipline. As the meeting ended, Rena caught up with me near the door. You humbled them, she said. I adjusted my binder under my arm. No. Gravity did that. Yan I just documented the fall. In the weeks that followed, the warehouse became the cleanest moral lesson I had ever seen with pallet racks. Funny what happens when consequences stop being theoretical. Forklifts got serviced on schedule, reverse alarms screamed like offended geese, inspection forms were completed in real time instead of copied like bad homework. Workers used approved platforms and access equipment. Travel lanes stayed clear. Supervisors actually supervised, which had apparently been a hidden feature all along. Brad survived. That mattered most. He came back later on restricted duty, moving slower, speaking softer, and looking at forklifts the way sailors look at storms. During one follow-up session, he asked if I would review the site hazard reporting process with him. No jokes, no swagger. Just humility with a bruise under it. I did. Because my job was never vengeance by destruction, it was vengeance by correction. Make them face the truth, live with the record, and rebuild under rules they once mocked. That lasts longer than a dramatic speech and leaves fewer lawyers celebrating. Vic did not last. The internal review found enough deferred maintenance decisions, false approvals, and ignored warnings to end his reign without much ceremony. Owen stayed temporarily, stripped of authority over equipment controls, which in corporate terms is rather like keeping the crown and losing the kingdom. Rena got promoted. That one tasted excellent. As for me, I gained something better than applause. I gained leverage. Regional leadership began inviting me in earlier, before launches, before openings, before some clever budget cutter decided that maintenance was optional and human bones were flexible assets. I rewrote vendor language to tighten service obligations, escalation deadlines, and audit rights. I pushed for clearer supervisory accountability in employment terms. I added record preservation triggers after serious incidents and near misses, because memory is unreliable and documents are harder to charm. That is the secret nobody tells young women in corporate life. Competence is good. Evidence is better. If you want power that survives a room full of dismissive smiles, learn where money, liability, and personal accountability shake hands. That is where the truth gets teeth. One afternoon, sometime after the dust had settled, I walked the floor again. The same concrete, the same aisles, different air. A driver stopped fully at an intersection, sounded the horn, checked both directions, and eased through like his future depended on it. Good. It did. Leon approached me carrying a clipboard with all the seriousness of a converted sinner. "We flagged a brake issue on Unit 4 and pulled it from service," he said. I looked at the form, then at him. "Excellent. You have discovered civilization." He actually laughed, though very carefully. When he left, I stood a moment under the warehouse lights and let myself feel it. Not triumph, exactly. Something sharper, cleaner. The satisfaction of having been underestimated by men who thought confidence outranked competence, then forcing them to learn the difference in writing. I had walked into that building as the young woman they intended to brush off. I left as the reason their excuses no longer worked. That is a useful position for a woman to hold, especially one in sensible shoes. And I will tell you this much: no one at Lattice Harbor laughs during my safety meetings now.